Okay, hello everyone. We're going to get started. Once again, my name's Anita McCuitt, President-elect of the Canadian Club of Toronto, and your host for today. Thank you for joining us for our first event of 2020, and thank you as well to our online viewers. We're also grateful to the sponsors of today's event, EY, represented by Eric Rawlinson, and Scotiabank, represented by Jillian Riley. Give them a round of applause. And now it's time to hear from our panelists about what 2020 has in store. There are so many questions that hang in the balance. How will the Liberal minority government fare on Parliament Hill? What impact will political and economic developments south of the border and maybe in the Middle East have on our economy? What influence will regional political differences have on our markets and our ability to attract global investors? Don't forget to send your questions up early and we'll make sure they get into the mix as well. So now let's introduce our panel. Our current club president, Bruce Sellery, will moderate the discussion. He's a business journalist and columnist for CBC Radio and Cityline and hosts a weekly radio show on Sirius XM. He spent a decade as an anchor at BNN and is the author of 2 best-selling personal finance books. Joining Bruce are Kevin Carmichael. Kevin is the national business columnist at the Financial Post and a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation. For more than a decade, he traveled between Ottawa and Washington, writing about economics and politics for Bloomberg News and The Globe. Amanda Lang is anchor of Bloomberg Television Canada. She was a key part of the team that launched BNN Bloomberg's predecessor, ROB-TV, in 1999. She started her journalism career at The Globe and Mail, and then The National Post, before moving into television with ROB-TV and then CNN. JF Perrault is a senior vice president and chief economist for Scotiabank. JF has also held prominent roles with the federal government, the Bank of Canada, the IMF, and the World Bank. Matt Gurney. For 7 years, Matt was a columnist and editor in the National Post comment section. He also served as host of the National Post Radio on Sirius XM for a year and a half, beginning in 2015. He also worked at Global News. And last but not least, Shauna Sexsmith has been in the investment industry for over 3 decades. She's a chartered financial analyst, and she manages the Canadian and North American growth equity mandates for institutional and retail clients for Manulife Asset Management. Bruce, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anita. Hello, everyone. 43. 43. Jeez. You might have caught a little grimace from Shauna Sexsmith when we talked about her credibility and experience and wisdom in the industry. Shauna's been with us before, as have all of our panelists except for Matt, so welcome, Matt. My one piece of advice is, as you make predictions for the year ahead, swing for the fences. Just swing for the fences. Those of you who know JF and who have been with us in the past notice that he has grown a beard for today's event. JF, how was your vacation in Costa Rica? Was it good? Did you have a good time?
Awesome.
I'm just kidding. He told me he's had the beard since October, so we can kid him all he wants, but he's had it for a while. So as I always do, I watched the video from last year's event, and my summary is that the predictions were directionally accurate, but understated. It's an understatement to say that they were understated. 2019 was an insanely crazy year. The big focus in terms of the commentary on Justin Trudeau and his leadership was the tutting about the photos in India. That was the big idea. And on the one hand, there were people who were critical of him for dressing like he was in a Bollywood musical. And on the other hand, there were people who were like, what's the big deal? So he likes to dress in costume. Well, of course, that turned out in a surprising way that no one here would have ever predicted. It was a big year in terms of the craziness of Trump. That is JF's word, probably accurate. And JF, one of the things you were talking, you had this whole list of things that could happen in the U.S., like you're just throwing them out there like that'll never happen, including the U.S. withdrawal from Syria. You kind of threw it out like, oh, that'll never happen. And of course, that happened. So who knows what else is going to happen here? The impeachment in the House, the quid pro quo in Ukraine, the tons on Brexit. There's talk of Wexit. The Canadian market's quite strong, up 20% over the last year, and economic growth was strong as well. So much happened. Let's get to 2020. We are going to begin with my first question, and that is this. What is the single most relevant variable to Canada's financial outlook in 2020? Single most relevant variable to Canada's outlook in 2020, and why? JF, I begin with you. This is your two-sentence answer, by the way. I know you're an economist. No PowerPoint slides. Yeah, it depends. It depends. Two sentences.
So it doesn't depend. Well, it depends on Trump, but confidence and consumer confidence measures. What we've seen over the last year has been in Canada, up until a few months ago, really quite strong confidence numbers, both on the household side and on the business side, despite a tremendous amount of global uncertainty.
Shauna, single biggest variable.
Whatever happens in the U.S., right? So to that point, Canadians get confidence when their trading partner is acting rationally, and maybe they finally sign the USMCA, and just the craziness, and if U.S. economic growth continues, it'll help Canada.
Kevin, single biggest variable.
Exchange rate. The exchange rate, because the legacy economy, what I call the legacy economy, the tangible economy, has figured out how to deal with exchange rate fluctuations. The innovation economy, the intangible economy, has not. And the intangible economy is what's driving growth and just about everything that's going right in Canada right now. So these guys still rely on a favorable exchange rate. So that's my choice.
Amanda, for you?
I'm going to agree that it's the U.S., and I guess I'll take it a step further and say geopolitics. That really what worries me about people I talk to about the U.S. economy is that they will shoot themselves in the foot, and by which I mean Donald Trump will shoot them in the foot with geopolitical decisions.
Matt?
I was going to say geopolitics, so
Sorry.
That's okay. Now I'll give you the same answer slightly differently. I'll give you a one-word answer and then I'll expand. The one word, events. When you and I first spoke to get this set, Boris Johnson had not been re-elected as British Prime Minister. Donald Trump had not been impeached. Andrew Scheer was leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, and Mike Babcock was coaching the Maple Leafs. So let's jump forward to now. And then I joked with my wife this morning. She said to me, "What are you doing today?" I'm like, "Well, I'm gathering in front of hundreds of influential people, and I'm going to tell them what's going to happen over the next 12 months." And she looked at me, and she's like, "You're an idiot. Try 12 hours." So my phone is on the table next to me here for two reasons. One, it's uncomfortable to sit on. Two, I've been checking Twitter obsessively, and there has been news developments in the last hour. Nothing that's going to change our outlook, but in the last hour, the Canadian military said it's getting our forces out of Iraq. They're moving them temporarily into Kuwait. Why? Because of the geopolitical uncertainty in the Middle East. I couldn't have told you that this morning.
Right. Amanda, I want to pick up on the geopolitical thought. You anchor a show that is, it originates from Toronto, but it is global in nature across the Bloomberg network. So you have a global view, and you're required to have a global view. What's your take on the unfolding situation in Iran in particular, as it relates to the stock market and the economy?
Well, and the lens that we bring to it is what people need to think about it in terms of investing. So there are many, many different ways to approach this story. But from that lens, what people are grappling with is, and you take the price of oil as just one kind of data point as an entree. Oil said, okay, that's of concern. Wait a minute, supply hasn't been affected. Okay, it's not of concern. Does that mean it's not of concern? Of course not. Do we compare this to previous invasions? Is this uncharted territory? So the market is a very specific animal trying to price something. The market is saying, no big deal. I think human beings will say it is a big deal. And that's, to Jeff's point, when confidence becomes the issue. When I say shoot in the foot, I don't mean that we're necessarily at war. I just mean the lack of confidence. That's what people are watching for. That's what people are afraid of.
Shauna, what did you make of the market reaction? And there hasn't been tons of days.
Yeah, I think it's predictable. I mean, geopolitical events have happened. Attacks have happened in the Mideast. We've had, Iraq invade Kuwait. We've had the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War. So I looked through, how the market reacted in each of those cases, and, generally speaking, they were shorter lived than what people were afraid of up front. Like the first Gulf War, people thought this was World War III Armageddon coming, and it wasn't. And so once the market got through past that point, it went straight up. So we had an initial reaction down and then went straight up after that. So the economy was far more important in the longer run. In the short term, you do get some sell-offs, but at this point, the market is sitting back with a wait-see attitude. I think the one thing that's important to note is that the strength of the U.S. economy and the strength of the Iranian economy are like on different planets, and for them to degenerate into something bigger is going to drag in Russia, Syria, Iraq, Turkey, Israel, and I don't think anyone wants to go there. And I think that's why the market's just sort of being a little circumspect.
JF, what's your 2 cents?
So I think about it a little bit differently. I worry less about the immediate impacts of a war with Iran. I worry more about this is another very hard data point that indicates that there are no bounds with Trump. So as we close the year out and we had this deal with China was in the works, people are starting to think, okay, things are coming together a little bit. Next year, this year is going to be more comfortable. And here we are at the beginning of the year with something that was on, well, arguably on nobody's radar, that has potentially very significant geopolitical and financial economic consequences. And it's like, it's the first week of the year, right? So what else is it going to be? And I think that's the more damaging part in my mind is like, this is just, we're on the crazy train again. And like, it's year one, and are we, at the top of the roller coaster or at the bottom of the roller coaster? We have no way of knowing.
Kevin, I want to loop in another topic that we haven't mentioned yet, and that is climate change. And so we're looking at this from an economic and from a market perspective, and yet you cannot look at a website or talk about any of the news events of the day without rolling in the fires in Australia, the carbon tax, the questions about the conservative loss and whether it was connected to climate change in some way. Where do you place that as an issue? Do we talk about it too much? Do we talk about it too little?
We probably don't talk about it enough, but the problem is we don't know exactly how to model it yet. I mean, it's still in the political realm where we don't have any sort of hard signposts on which to say, okay, the carbon tax is actually going to be here, so we can sort of price the future based on that benchmark. We don't have that yet. So I think, though obviously you need to take it seriously, to me it's one of those meta forces that is going to push the economy and markets in a particular direction. We just don't know how far, and maybe it could go a little bit this way, maybe it could go a little bit that way, but it definitely matters.
Amanda.
It's one of the things in our world that is changing on an exponential basis. So we all know this. We know exponential is different. 30 linear steps takes me over there. 30 exponential steps takes me around the world, 26 times? We just don't know which step we're on. And our prefrontal cortex is not equipped to understand exponential. So I was actually interviewing somebody about this today who's a consultant. When you're talking to a business leader about an exponential change, how on earth are they supposed to model for that? How do they operate like they're on step 6 of exponential? Linear they get, linear they can do. In the business world, what we do is we fast follow. We wait till the thing happens, and then we go jump on it really quick. And for the most part, that works. Not always. Failed businesses abound because of it. With the climate, it's fast follow means, right, we're dead.
Matt, you have written on this topic, in particular as it relates to the Conservatives' election loss. And in that story, you talk about whether it was a really relevant issue for them. Why don't you bring us that perspective?
I took a position that a lot of my peers disagreed with, and a lot of the people sending me unhinged emails absolutely agreed with. I didn't think it was as big of an issue as it was talked about. I mean, I don't think it helped, and I think it probably hurt. But I think, I'm not going to relitigate the last election campaign. I think the Conservatives had bigger problems. Let's put it that way. Why do I not think it's a huge issue? Well, let's put side by side 2 stories I read this morning. 1, Australia is on fire. 2, Canadians love SUVs. We'll tell pollsters that we are freaked out about climate change. I mean, and that's why a lot of the smart money said, oh, well, of course it's going to be a huge election issue. Canadians are really, really concerned about climate change. I think they are, but they're concerned about just enough things ahead of climate change that I don't think it was the silver bullet for the Prime Minister that defeated Andrew Scheer. Is it going to be a huge issue? My gut feeling on climate change, and this is cynical, so forgive me, I like to be more of an optimist early in the new year. When it becomes a problem that's North America is on fire, I think North Americans will care. I think we're freaked out about the koala bears, but I think as long as we keep signaling with our wallets that we want the big comfy cars, we want to get on jets and fly all over the world for reasonably priced vacations, we want to consume a Caesar salad that has ingredients that were gathered from like 7,000 miles worth of shipping, I just don't see that it's something we really care that much about.
Shauna.
Yeah, so climate change is very much at the forefront for institutional investors. Every single request for proposal that we get from a consultant, from an institution, a major plan sponsor or other large institution, asks specifically what is our ESG policy, and that includes climate change actions. Then we use scenario analysis looking at the impact of carbon taxes and various other measurable variables, and it's kind of a Ouija science right now. I mean, it's certainly not hard and fast, but it is forcing institutional investors like myself to make this a topic as part of every single conversation with every single company. And I even have a client, a European client, that said, no oil sand stocks in our portfolio. And that's not uncommon. I've heard that elsewhere.
Now,
so it's already impacting valuations in the market today.
And certainly climate, an enormous theme for the Liberal government as they announced the new cabinet and talked about priorities for the year. Amanda, I want to ask you, Mark Carney's back in Canada, or coming back to Canada. He will locate in Ottawa. How long before he is a cabinet minister in the Liberal government?
Oh dear. I can't speak for any of the parties involved that would need to make that transaction happen. I'm glad you brought Mark Carney up, though, because I think if you had to say, is there a person on the planet who's had a positive impact on how the business world is thinking about climate, Carney is top 10 for me, and that's before he takes on this UN role. And that's because at the Bank of England and at the Financial Stability Board, he has been part of the group getting the reinsurers to properly price the risk. And as we all know, the insurance industry will determine how we live. What they're doing now is what we'll be doing in 5 or 10 years. And getting them to properly price it means all of the businesses that want to invest on it and all the businesses like the banks that want to put it on their balance sheet properly begin to have a model. It's early days, but he's been part of the process to take it seriously. I will say I still do television shows and hear from people who don't take this seriously. They are out there, they vote, they walk among us. I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah. Matt, I'm going to ask you the Mark Carney question in a second, but I just want to reinforce, if you have questions, send them up earlier rather than later. Summon your inner grade 2 student as it concerns your penmanship versus you're trying to fake an OxyContin prescription. I need to be able to read the questions when I have them here, so make them legible. Your take on Mark Carney and what role he might play next?
Well, first of all, my immediate take is always get someone else to fake your Oxy prescriptions.
Oh,
that's
okay.
an important rule.
Okay.
On the Mark Carney issue specifically, on federal politics more generally, I think we're probably, and I'm going to look like an idiot in an hour when this all gets proven wrong, but I think we're going to look at a 6-month period where not a lot's going to happen for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Liberals haven't let the Prime Minister out of his box yet, like wherever they've put him since the election. The only thing we know about him since election night is that he has a beard now. That's it.
Right.
The Conservatives are electing a new leader in June. So they're not going to want to do anything until now and then except maintain operations. And the NDP has no money. Like, they did not have Mr. Singh riding a bus because he enjoyed the experience in the last election. They're going to need years to get money. So I think in terms of whether it's Mark Carney or anyone else, I don't expect to see much happen for the 6 months. Once the Conservatives have a new leader, then maybe we'll start to see what's going to happen.
JF, bigger deficits expected in this fall fiscal update. The numbers keep climbing. You have a background with the Department of Finance. At what point do you pick up the phone and ask your colleagues to stage an intervention? Does that time ever come?
So the challenge, and you saw this in the last election, the challenge is, as much as some folks will say deficits matter, the reality is, from a political perspective, they don't. Right? No party was running on a campaign and said, you know what, we're really worried about the deficit. We're going to do something about it this year or next year. You know, Conservatives had a balanced budget pledge, but it was way out, and there weren't any details. So there is, you know, akin to the kind of the climate change issue, there is very little appetite for people to take the deficit very seriously. So as long as that's the case, you know, Morneau's may be able to say, well, we've got a deficit to GDP, or debt to GDP path that's going down, and that's fine. We're AAA, best in the G7. And until that changes, until that political calculus changes, I don't see that there's any appetite on the part of the Liberals and possibly in the part of Conservatives, depending on where things go, to do anything about it.
Should there be an appetite? Does that worry you as the chief economist of a major bank?
Not tremendously. I mean, firstly, there's a conjunctural issue, which is now is not the right time to start thinking about this very seriously in any event. So you don't want to slam on the fiscal brakes now. The economy is softer than it was. There are concerns. So you set that aside for the moment. The other more important aspect, though, is there still is at a global level a shortage of investable assets. Right? There are too many savings, not enough investment opportunities. That's why, to some degree, government bond rates are so low across the world. I mean, monetary policy plays a role there, but it's because there's such strong demand for these things. And that demand is a function of the fact that folks are saving too much. And as long as that's the case, it makes it much more easy to issue debt because you don't have to pay the consequence of that. Now, that could change at some point in time. And what could cause that change is you actually need a pretty big increase in government debt to be able to absorb those savings, but we don't see that happening. So as long as that's not happening, you know, the fact that they're running, you know, a deficit of $20 billion or so, the debt to GDP goes down gradually, to me is not a particularly big problem.
What about for you, Shauna? Is it a problem?
No.
No.
No, I think the market is more concerned about earnings and interest rates and the deficit, although it may be a little bit worrisome, and it's shame on you, you can't live within your means kind of thing. I don't think it really matters in terms of the equity markets. And in terms of Canada's debt to GDP ratio, it is, you know, maybe the good house on a bad street, you know, because a lot of the other G7 countries are in worse shape.
Matt, I want to come back to your comments about the Conservative leadership race, which will unfold over the course of the next 6 months. What are the top 2 or 3 criteria that you believe delegates should be shopping for when they look to hire a new leader?
This is going to sound like it's a criticism of the last leader, and I don't intend it that way, because everything I know about him suggests that he actually is a decent man. Likability. And I think, you know, and I've written this in my column, so I'm not revealing anything I haven't said before. It's hard to win an election in this country as a Conservative, at least on the federal level, not so much in Alberta, but let's say like nationally. It's hard to win a national campaign if you're a Conservative, right? You start a little bit behind. One of the only things you can do at the outset to give yourself an advantage is to have someone out there who brings something personally to them that puts them a little bit ahead. And I think the Conservatives last time and this time actually do have some candidates who could go out there and really put a good foot forward for the party in a way that Andrew Scheer, despite, again, what I think was personal decency on his part, he didn't connect well. I don't think it's too cynical to note that in politics, optics matters, likability matters, charisma matters. It's not the only thing that matters. I'm not even sure it's the most important thing, but if you're picking a new leader after an election, which, forgive me, any Conservatives in the room, was extremely winnable for the Conservative Party, and they still weren't able to seal the deal, you've got to ask yourself why, and it won't solve all your problems, but it'll put you in a better position for next time. Because when's next time going to be? Not in the next 6 months. I have zero certainty it won't be 6 months and 10 days or 2 years. Who knows? No one has any idea. Get a good leader. It won't fix all the problems, but it'll help.
Amanda, I'm not going to ask you to pick a leader, but I will say, by way of historical reference, is I did ask Amanda this question a couple of years ago, and the question I asked was, will Kevin O'Leary be the leader of the Conservative Party? I asked this question, and her answer was no. So, I mean, you were accurate on that front.
Practically.
I mean, it was prescient.
Ask me anything.
Prescient. So this time, what would you say on leadership?
So I actually want to get in on this because I was mad you didn't ask me about the deficit question. So this is my way at it.
Okay.
So when you say likability, I would say if the Conservatives want to win, they need to have electability, right? It's somebody who can win. And the problem is, to me, the problem with the Conservative Party right now is the 2 big issues that they're getting hung up on. If they want to be fiscally restrained, they're called austere. And can I just go on the record here? I'm offside here. Deficits do matter. Maybe not fiscally, maybe not for monetary policy, maybe not in terms of how our debt and how we manage it. they matter intellectually. We have a tax base we collectively send to Ottawa. If they're spending more than that, we have a right to know why. If they want to raise debt for things, they should do that. If they're going to tax us, let's have a that's what democracy is for. Let's have the conversation. Do you need more money? Well, maybe we'll send it to you. John Tory did it here. He's raising our property taxes. Are you mad? I'm mad. But does it make sense? Yes, it makes sense. That's the clarity. So the one issue that they could be fiscally prudent on, they're a muck on, because they can't do it. They're called austere. They've lost the plot. The other issue is climate change. You can't go out there in this country and say it's either the energy sector or climate change. We can't do it. Otherwise, we may as well just fold up shop, right, and sell ourselves to the United States. They want our water anyway. We need a solution, and so you can't deny the climate because you're pro-energy. There is a middle way. I don't think that the federal government's getting it right, personally. There is a way to do both that we bloody well have to do for the next 20, 30 years.
So there will be a new leader of the Conservative Party. There will be a new leader, Kevin, for the Bank of Canada. You have written on a number of candidates who you believe are in the mix. What is your prediction for who might get that job?
Do I really need to go on record here saying who might get that job?
Well, you already wrote a column about it. You gave us 6 names.
I gave you 6 names. Could I repeat those 6 names?
You can repeat the 6 names, but then in the confidentiality of this room, of which there is none, no one's gonna say anything. It's fine. Charterhouse rules.
Look, I do believe that it's a serious process. This election process. It's based on it's a merit-based process. So quality people will go in there. I think maybe it's the one part of Ottawa that's not entirely broken, so somebody good will come out at the other end. But
It's a nice low standard.
There'll be
Just
two or
keep
there'll
it
be
under
two or
promise
three,
and over deliver.
There'll be 2 or 3 quality people at the end of the process, and that's when the political winds will dictate who that person is.
If one of them's a woman, is it likely to be the woman?
If the woman is proven herself to be as good as the other people who've come through at the end, yeah, probably.
This
there's
is
a candidate that you
this is the problem with the world we live in, is when the deputy at the Bank of England, who was a woman, didn't get that job, the brief was she must be a dud.
Yeah.
It's the dark underbelly of trying to play for diversity, right? She's not a dud, by the way. She's perfectly fine.
The feeling in Ottawa, obviously, is if the current deputy, senior deputy at the Bank of Canada, can show herself to be as good as everybody else that comes through the process, then the current government would have a hard time not putting a woman in that position. So it's probably Carolyn Wilkins's opportunity to lose, but
Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? JF, I want to ask this question, extraordinary penmanship here. When does the Canadian consumer run out of gas with record high debt levels and moderate wage growth? So you talked about your absence of grave concern on the deficit for the government. Do you have a bigger concern about the debt levels and the deficits that Canadians are running in their households?
Well, we've kind of already seen that in Canada. So for the last year, retail sales and consumption have been really weak. There's a bit of a mystery as to why that is. Is it because their consumers are really indebted? Is it because debt service costs have started to rise or risen and kind of crowding out income? But wage growth in Canada is like 4 or 5% or 4.5%. It's been very strong wage growth and very strong employment growth. So the wage bill has increased quite significantly, but consumers aren't spending. And there's a bit of a mystery there. And as I said, for most of the year, this was an environment where confidence was high. So as we think about this year, we are worried about, as I said, the level of consumer confidence, because in principle, they've got income to spend, but are they scared into believing that it's better for them to hold off, to pay down debt, to worry about affordability, worry about house prices, worry about where interest rates are going to go? And that seems to have been something that's played on consumer behavior over the last year to a greater degree than I think anybody around my community would have expected. Because you look at it ex post, this was a great year for households, right? Super strong employment growth and very strong wage growth.
Kevin, I want to come to you and include China in our conversation. So when I looked at the video from last year, the arrest in Vancouver of the CFO had occurred in December, but we didn't talk much about it in January. It's turned out to be maybe a bigger story than we would have anticipated then. How is it playing out from an economic perspective?
I think you could argue it's probably the biggest story. I mean, we talk a lot about all the uncertainty and problems that emanate from Trump, but the fact that China decided to come down on us the way it did because we were just sort of following due process and arresting this executive on behalf of our probably biggest ally, that was the shock to me, because we were ready for all the craziness that could have come out of Washington,
But part of the at that time, a year ago, one of the reasons we thought we could probably balance that because we had all this opportunity, we were going to do diversified trade, right? And China was the next obvious place to go. And then that door was slammed in our faces, and suddenly we had nowhere to go. Because we're Canadians, so we want to sell everything to the U.S. first, and well, they might not be the right market for us. Well, we'll go to the next big one instead, and then suddenly we had no third option. And so a big, sort of from the trade perspective, I think over the next few years, this year, and is like trying to find new markets.
Shauna, what do you anticipate for Canadian publicly traded companies or American publicly traded companies in terms of how that trade conflict plays out in earnings?
So yeah, it's the U.S.-China trade war that's the relevant issue here. And Canada is just kind of stuck sitting between a rock and a hard place waiting for this to play itself out. I don't think there's going to be any new tariffs announced, anytime soon. And this phase 1 of the U.S.-China trade deal will probably be a nice photo op, but nothing substantial. But at least it'll take some of the rhetoric and the pressure off of that because it was really bad at various times last year. But still, we charged ahead. The U.S. economy is strong and growing, and this has to get resolved. But I don't know if it's going to happen this year.
Amanda, do you want to lob
Just
something
that
there?
many experts will say this is a big existential problem because the U.S. and China, it's less political than it may appear. It really is about more serious, longer-term issues. And I'll tell you, I've talked to people at the State Department, so non-political, well-intentioned, and they believe that Huawei is an agent of the state, and any nation that does business with Huawei will be treated as a non-ally, a non-Five Eye. So it's a pretty serious question. This isn't just a kind of a political question. There are very serious security issues. But for the U.S., it may be a longer-term play on trade, and we are a tiny little trading nation stuck in the middle.
I'm going to ask you all a yes-no question, and then I will return for comments. But first, I'm going to ask you the yes-no. The yes-no is, will Trump be president 12 months from today? The yes-no.
You're starting at that end, right?
I'm starting at your end, JF. Yes or no?
No.
He will not be. Shauna, yes or no?
It depends.
You're not an economist. You're a portfolio manager.
Who's he running against at
Kevin.
current state?
No.
Amanda.
No.
Matt.
Yes?
Yes. Why yes?
Well, because the new guy wouldn't have been sworn in yet.
Boom! There's your mic drop, Matt. There's your mic drop.
I had to think about what the calendar was, but then I'm like, yeah, that's a safe bet.
Yeah.
Like, if you had asked, will he be reelected, I would have said depends.
Ever
but
the
question you asked, I can answer.
That's fair. So now, if I clarify my terrible question, will Trump be reelected?
Yes.
Okay, now why do you say that?
Because I don't think the Democrats have figured out yet how to beat him. And I think as long as they keep fighting on their own left flank, they're not going to ignore the problem on the right flank. And I think that's the problem they have. This is a 51-49 prediction for me because God only knows what's happened while we've been sitting up here. I don't think the president is going to be impeached. I know some people continue to think there might be a surprise in the Senate. I don't see it. It might be more exciting and dramatic than we expect, but I don't think he'll be removed from office. And I think the Democrats are probably, it's theirs to lose, and they'll probably find a way. I don't have confidence in them right now that they'll actually be able to beat him.
Shauna, you said it depends on who.
Basically who the Democrats put up against him.
And who do you think, so there isn't that broad a spectrum in terms of candidates, but there is some differentiation amongst the candidates, as far left as they go, and then
so if it's someone who's closer to the center, AKA Biden, or someone similar, I think they have a real shot at taking it away from Trump. But if they go polar opposite, crazy on the left side, I think people will stick with the crazy they know than the crazy they don't know.
JF, speaking of crazy, JF, how wide is, not you, your word, how wide is the spectrum from an economics perspective? Like, are we talking Castro on one hand?
What spectrum?
On the spectrum of Democratic candidates. So some of the policies that Warren.
But I think a lot of that is kind of misplaced attention. I mean, the reality is, for any president to achieve anything in the U.S., you need to carry the Senate. So even if you have a Castro, well, can't be him anymore, but a Warren or a Sanders come in, unless they carry the Senate, they won't be able to do anything substantial. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, electability matters, and maybe Warren is a tougher choice against Trump. But if she wins, she's not going to be able to do very much, and she'll probably be far less aggressive in using executive power than Trump was. So,
Amanda, the question for the audience was, who's going to be the Democratic leader, and can they beat Trump? Who do you think is going to be the leader?
So not unlike the question with Trump, I'm forever colored by what I want to happen versus what I think will happen. I think the most likely scenario is Biden. I don't think that, I guess to Jeff's point, I think the person I want is Elizabeth Warren. And the reason for that is I don't think she's nearly as crazy as she's being painted. And anybody here who thinks she is crazy, I would urge you to go and read actually everything she's ever said, not what people say she said. Because she's not any crazier than, say, FDR or Harry Truman or any number of decent presidents in the past. And they're not all powerful.
Shauna, I want to work in the economic and market outlook in the U.S. in the lead up to that election, because could be a material variable for what voters decide to do. So far, it's been pretty great in America in many ways.
And it is probably going to continue because we had 3 rate cuts last year, and there's a lag effect to how the rate cuts work their way through the economy. So, Third World War in the Middle East, notwithstanding, I think the economy is going to continue to be good in the U.S. leading up to the election. And I think that goes in Trump's favor, but I don't think it's the number one thing people think about in the voting booth.
I want to work in a more specific prediction on the Canadian market, because I'd be remiss if we didn't do that. Shauna, flat, up, or down in the year ahead?
Flat with a up bias. I mean, we're trading slightly above the historical average on a PE ratio, but we have very anemic earnings growth predicted for next year. So, and after a great year last year, so I don't think we're going to go down. I don't think it's going to be a big crash, but it's not going to be a barn burner year. So flat-ish to up-ish.
How are you thinking about cash? I mean, 10 years of a bull run, it certainly has people be theoretically questioning just how much further this can go. I mean, last year we talked about valuations. You said valuations a year ago are cheap. Are they still cheap? And how do you think about cash?
No, they're slightly more expensive with a slightly lower earnings outlook. So from a valuation perspective, it's a deterioration from last year. But that doesn't mean it's a bad market. It's not crazy overvalued, but we have challenges in the energy sector, right? That's a big part of the market. We have challenges in the bank sector. I mean, there's 0 earnings growth projected for the banks next year. That's 20% of the index. So, those things sort of are a bit of an anchor on the market.
Amanda, you don't run money, but you talk to people who run money all day, every day. Flat, up, or down?
I will resist that kind of prediction, except to say I think the risk for a recession are still real. The only thing I did want to say is we do take these kind of arbitrary measures that I was reminded of recently of the calendar year. So we decide that December to December is how we're going to measure the market, and yay, the S&P 500's up, whatever it was, 26%. If you go September to September, it was 2%. And so to me, it's just a reminder of what matters to us is what matters to us. And there are people in these markets who should not be as exposed. They should not be. They should have a shorter-term horizon. If you're older, if you rely on the income, such as it is. Stocks are stocks. They can go down 20%. They do not love you back. And so I do think a lot of the people that we hear from, unfortunately, are market participants who don't have a vested interest in telling you to go to cash. But sometimes that is the right thing to do.
Jeff, I'm going to ask you for a prediction and Kevin for a nuance, and that is on the outlook for the Canadian economy. A year ago, you said it will grow, it will be positive, and then you had all sorts of caveats, like 12,000 caveats. So please make a prediction, and you can have 11,000 caveats this time.
So we think growth next year will be about what it was this year, so around 1.5.
Wow,
You want a
okay.
story on that, or?
What are the risk factors that would say it's not anywhere near 1.5?
So a challenge that we're currently dealing with is there's very clear evidence in the fourth quarter the growth has slowed dramatically. Now, I think we are tending to think this is a temporary thing, that it's a reflection of peak uncertainty in October or September, and that's translating into weaker spending in Canada in the fourth quarter. If that's wrong, that there's more legs to this weakness, so for instance, consumers are more freaked out than we think they are, then it's very easy to end up with much lower growth than 1.5 than we currently have. And that's just from a purely kind of Canadian kind of psychological perspective. You're layering on top of that, very obvious risks down south. Trump, we've talked about the China risk. There's still significant risk on the trade side in the US, right? I mean, Trump has talked about the Europeans as being the worst enemies of the US on the trade front. And so that's, that is going to remain there until he's there. So we're a ton of uncertainty, and all that uncertainty is on the downside as far as we're concerned.
Kevin, JF mentioned consumer confidence. A recent study from Nanos on 56% of Canadians believe a recession is somewhat likely in 2020. What's your sense for
Oh, they just listen to JF too often. It's, I mean, is it of course it's somewhat likely given all that's going on, but a sort of on the street perception of whether there's going to be a recession or not. I mean, what's that based on? That's based on the narrative. Who creates the narrative? People like me and Amanda. Who do we put on TV or in the papers probably more often than everybody else? David Rosenberg. He's the only guy on the street who's out there projecting that there could be a recession. So that's going to. I'm not saying Rosenberg is wrong. I'm just saying he's leading the band, and that's gotten inside people's heads.
In your column yesterday, you said demographics is the biggest metaforce on the horizon. What did you mean by that? And I love the use of metaphors.
It relates to, I could have written a column about climate change. I just had some thoughts about demographics, so decided to go that direction. There are a handful of things that are going to push us, as I said, about climate change in a certain direction. No matter what happens in 2020. That was kind of my point. Like we're talking about 2020 because this is to Amanda's point, because it's the first start of the year and we'll do this a year from now, and so we just we're shoving everything inside a calendar. It doesn't matter so much what happens this year. What really matters is where these metaphors, as I described them, are taking us over the next 5 years or 10 years.
Did you have a thought there, Matt?
Yeah, I live between two schools. Now, this is a weird thing to open with here, but what it means for the purposes of this.
So much of what you have said has been a weird thing to open with.
That's how I roll.
No caveat required.
I'm surrounded by crossing guards. They're everywhere. I hear whistles all the time in the morning and afternoon because the kids are all crossing the street. I was having lunch in Midtown Toronto. It was 11:30 lunch, and I kept hearing this whistle, and there was a crossing guard moving back and forth. And I didn't notice it at first, right, because I'm used to it. But then finally it hit me, why is there a crossing guard like now? There's no schools near here. It's not the start of the school day. It's not the end of the school day. And I realized the crossing guard was to help the elderly across the street. And that was something that had completely crept up on me. But then I started looking around, and I'm like, there's no kids in sight, but there's an awful lot of people who can't walk quickly enough to get across the road in one light sequence. Demographics are the thing that we're not talking about and probably that we're not thinking about. And on all the conversations we've had, everything that's been set up here, what happens to any prediction that any of us have made or that any of you walked in here with if we get off the stage and we find out that Iran just blew up an oil tanker in the Hormuz? What if that doesn't happen, but we don't realize the fact that all of a sudden a lot of the people around us are getting into their prime hip replacement years? There's a lot of challenges. Some of them are unpredictable and they're immediate. Some of them are guaranteed and long-term. And I don't know how we're supposed to weight our focus on what might happen tomorrow but probably won't, or what is happening and will happen 10 years from now.
So, can I just go on something quickly? Just the flip side of the aging story, and that's the bigger force. But of course, it's what's going on with immigration. And when we were here a year ago, none of us were really thinking about the impact that immigration was going to have on Canada's growth trajectory in the short term. So I just said, who cares about the short term? But things can surprise us, and so I think, given what we think we know about the way the Canadian economy works and all the ugly stuff that happened on the surface, we're surprised that we kind of still managed to muddle along. Well, why did we muddle along? Because there was this amazing population growth, and all these people are coming here with jobs and contributing to the economy, et cetera. So that is kind of what's pushing us forward, despite uncertainty around trade, despite all these other things that we're talking about.
All right, we're moving into the speed round. So these are quick questions. You've got 2, maybe 3 sentences to answer them. JF, for you, what is your view of the housing market in Toronto?
Solid and sustainable.
Wow, that was very succinct. Fantastic.
Will I get his first?
Yeah. Matt, while we're predicting, who will be the Liberal provincial leader?
Michael Coteau.
Why?
because I think he's more impressive the more you see him. He's a very good speaker, and I think he's the only one I've heard from so far that people have liked him the more they've seen him.
Amanda, do you think China will ever give us and the world protection over intellectual property in a trade deal?
I think they will say they will.
But they will not actually do that.
I don't think China's to be trusted for the foreseeable future.
Right. Kevin, other than a carbon tax, what other interventions could make a difference in climate change or on climate change?
On climate change, I mean, I think it's all about carbon tax. So I think what we need is like a proper one. So what could make a difference on climate change? A carbon tax price to actually making a difference. To the point about SUVs, the SUV story to me shows that the carbon tax isn't high enough.
Right. Shauna, I know you're not a big investor in cannabis stocks, but I will ask you, at what level do they need to sink to so that they represent a reasonable value, one that you would take a risk on?
So they are down 34% over the last year. I think the Horizons ETF is down more. The sector is still shrinking, and I need consolidation. So it's fewer players, because there's only $1.5 billion in revenue in this country, and there's like 200 cannabis stocks. It's just, they've got to consolidate.
All right, it is time for our last word. So this is the last question I will ask. Your answers are, again, to be, not 2 words, JF, but, 2 sentences.
That was 3 words.
Yeah, 3 words. I will begin with you, Matt. The last word could be a hope. It could be a wish. It could be a final prediction. It could be a wild card. It could be something we just haven't mentioned. What is your last word?
I think the one thing that I look to with hope and concern is the issue of reaction time. And I know it's perhaps a strange thing to say. We have policy instruments as a government. The economy will always adjust on the fly as things change. But I wonder if we're in a geopolitical moment where things will happen faster than those policy instruments and those economic instruments can keep up. Like I said already, what if during this lunch something else has blown up in the Middle East? What if those Australian fires get worse? That's the one thing I think about, and that's the one thing I would encourage all of us to think about in 2020. How quickly could we pivot from the relatively optimistic message we've had up on the stage? What if things go just a little bit worse than that? Are we in a position to pivot? We talked about the deficit not being a big deal. When would it become that, and how quickly could we respond?
Amanda, your last word.
This is a hope, not an expectation, but I hope that we get to a place where we understand what we need to do on climate in a way that informs our every decision. And I say that, as we all know, even in Australia today, there is no political will to take serious action. It is still an issue that politicians won't address, and it is late for all of us, and we resist that. And I really hope, because there's such opportunity on the other side of this realization, and for Canada especially, because we do so well at ideas and IP and new businesses, we could do well at this. We just have to find our way there. But it has to be a global realization. We can't do it alone. I hope that the US and China and Europe and Australia, which is the single biggest producer and exporter of coal to China, gets on board.
Kevin.
I hope the new Deputy Prime Minister brings the same force to an internal free trade agreement, to an interprovincial free trade agreement that she brought to renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Shauna.
Okay, world peace. No.
Oh, that's good. Are you going to sing something?
No, I actually,
from the 70s,
but
maybe?
along those lines, I hope the situation with the Huawei executive is resolved peacefully and our 2 Canadians come home.
Jeff.
Expectation, I think event risk is going to remain just as high in 2020 as it was last year, and that policymakers are going to have a hard time dealing with that.
A round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you very much. We're just going to sit.
Kevin, Amanda, JF, Matt, Shauna, and Bruce, on behalf of the Canadian Club of Toronto, I'd like to thank you for setting the right tone for our first event of 2020. It was a relatively optimistic message. Your energy, insights, and frankness are what our club is known for, and it's clear to see why our annual luncheon forecast is so popular. It's because of panelists like you. So, it was interesting to me as I listened to you. We managed to cover a lot of ground, Bruce. Well done. We talked about the short-term things that might happen, a lot of leadership races in the mix, and any number of events that could happen. But we also touched on some of those real macro forces: climate change, deficits, demographics, and it, no matter what happens, those forces continue. And it struck with me, Amanda, what you said about exponential change, and we don't know where we are. I'll be thinking about that some more. So there's so much we need to be keeping our eye on, whether it's local, provincial, national, or international. But I think Canada does continue to be a beacon of peace and prosperity, and the events around us matter now more than ever. Our club's business will remain focused on bringing a diversity of thought and speakers to our podium to help you make sense of it all. Panelists, thanks again for your contribution to the conversation today. I wish you all personally a successful year ahead. Bruce, once again, we thank you for your energetic and engaging and humorous moderation of today's event. Before we conclude, I'd like to offer another round of thanks to today's sponsors, EY and Scotiabank, and the National Post, which is our event partner. We'd also like to thank mediaevents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you all again soon.